Hello, I'm Gillian Robinson from Incore, the International Conflict Research Institute at the University of Ulster. We're here today to introduce you to a new resource we've been developing over the past couple of years, which is called Accounts of the Conflict. The intention of the seminar is to let you have a preview of the resource and to then discuss with you the uses of the resource.
My name is Adrian Grant and I'm the researcher on the Accounts of the Conflict project. So I'm here today mainly to facilitate the discussion.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gillian Robinson from Incore, which is the International Conflict Research Institute at the University of Ulster, based here at the McGee campus in Derry. And myself and my colleagues, Adrian and Owen, is also here somewhere. Hiding, is he? He's disappeared temporarily. We're delighted to be back again in this fantastic facility in town to have an opportunity to share with you some of the work we've been involved in over the last couple of years. So what we want to do is tell you a little bit about Accounts of the Conflict, what it is, why we developed it, let you have a preview of it. It is not yet a live resource. It will go live in about a month's time, and then have a discussion with you around what you think about it, how you think it might be useful or not, or any issues that you have or any suggestions you have for how we might improve it. So that's what we're aiming to do. For those of you who tweet, if any of you do, the hashtag is #AccountsNI. So what is Accounts? Accounts of the Conflict will create an online digital archive which will offer long-term storage and preservation of a range of personal accounts relating to life in Northern Ireland and the border region during the period of the conflict. And really, from an Incore perspective, we've been working on the Northern Ireland conflict in international comparative context for a long number of years now. And we believe that ongoing progress towards peace and stability in this region requires the development of a society which acknowledges, addresses, deals with and comes to terms with its past, and works towards a new vision of a society based on mutual respect, trust and interdependence. So the development of a sustainable peace in a region emerging from conflict requires an acknowledgement of the impact of the conflict at both individual and societal level, and a commitment to the non-repetition of events of the past. We would argue that one important way to ensure that the impact of the conflict is not forgotten is to document the events of the past in comprehensive, inclusive and ethical ways, to ensure that future generations have a record of the experiences of those who lived through and were impacted by the events of the time. We believe that two of the most pertinent objectives of any reconciliation process are the acknowledgement of the pain of the past and the development of a shared vision of a future free from violence, mistrust and hatred. And one crucial aspect of the dealing with the past debate has been the imperative to acknowledge the hurts, losses and experiences of the individuals that make up the society in which we live. So we believe that a diverse and accessible collection of personal stories from the conflict is a crucial part in this process of documenting what happened, ensuring that societal, community and individual memories are captured and that lessons are learned for the past for future generations. So the main facilities that Accounts of the Conflict are going to generate is firstly a digital repository for the long-term storage and preservation of storytelling outputs. I'll talk in more detail about this in a minute. A searchable digital archive containing publicly available information about stories related to Northern Ireland, and a website where extracts from some of the stories will be available where we have permission to hold them. And finally, there will be an automatic deposit facility for future projects to add stories to Accounts of the Conflict. So what we want to do today is tell you a little bit about the background to Accounts, raise your awareness of the resource. Maybe some of you in this room have been involved in telling your story, your experience of the conflict in the past. We would like to attract, persuade and inform potential contributors or collection owners to deposit with us. We want to, as I've said, have a discussion around the potential uses of the resource. And finally, we have a conference in a month's time where the resource will be launched, and we'd be more than happy to invite you to join us for that conference. Let me see. We had two main incentives for writing a proposal to try to get funding to do this work, and we've been funded by the Peace 3 programme. The first incentive was that we were very aware, and I know many of you in this room are also aware, of the vast range of story collecting projects that have gone on in Northern Ireland, particularly since the ceasefires and the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement, but even before that. Northern Ireland has a rich storytelling tradition, and people have recorded various accounts of their experience of living through the conflict. A lot of those projects were carried out by voluntary and community sector organisations who spent a lot of time deciding on how to go about their work, setting up the standards, and most importantly, building trust with the individuals whose stories they were recording. So a lot of that work has gone on for a good number of years, and there's been a variety of outputs like books, DVDs, edited books, dramatic performances, and so on. But we were aware that many of the collections hadn't had the opportunity or perhaps the resource to think about the long-term storage of the collection. So many of the collections were already lost. People didn't know where to access them. Perhaps the book that had been published was out of print and no longer easily available, etc., etc. So our first motivation then was that we were aware of this vast range of work that had gone on and the importance of it, but we were concerned that that work was being lost. And you know, as we move on through the peace building process, some of those stories would be lost forever because the individual who gave the story may perhaps have died or no longer be in a position to share or tell their story. So that was our first motivation. So with that in mind, we decided we wanted to create a process in this project that would allow us to work in partnership with organisations or projects that were collecting stories. So it's important that you're clear, we haven't started collecting stories ourselves. What we've done is we've worked with other organisations and projects who've been collecting stories. And we've talked with them about whether it would be appropriate for their project to be deposited with us, either because they don't have that resource or facility themselves, or for whatever reason. So obviously some projects will want to deposit, others will not. But that's fine. So we've been working with a number of projects. As well as the stories that we'll hold in our archive ourselves, we also wanted to build a searchable database of all the work that had gone on in the area. So say a book had been published 5 years ago that had 10 chapters with 10 different people's stories in, we would provide a bibliographic record to that, and so that people searching our resource would know that somebody, Gillian Robinson, had told her story. The story's not actually in the archive, but her story was told, and if you go to X book, if you can find it, or X DVD, you may be able to listen to her story. So there's two different components. One is the material we would hold ourselves, and the second is the materials that we would simply provide reference point to. So we would database all the stories in the public domain. Some existing collections already have an online presence, and we would also provide a link to that. And finally, and I'm going to come on to this now in more detail, we already run CAIN, how many of you have ever heard of CAIN, Conflict Archive on the internet? So about half of the room. Well, it's the premier online digital resource about the Northern Ireland Troubles and conflict, and has been running in the University of Ulster now since 1996. It's widely used and has a vast range of material. So we would like to link the stories that we have with the material on CAIN. And as I said, create an online deposit facility. So CAIN, I've just mentioned, we've run CAIN since 1996. Anything you want to know about the Troubles or that period in Northern Ireland, you can probably find in CAIN. So there are photographic collections, there are specialist sections on key events, there are chronologies, there are biographies of some of the names that are associated with the conflict down through the years. There are specialist sections on remembering victims, survivors and commemoration. There's ephemera collections. There's just a whole host of information. It's a wonderful resource. Something like 55,000 people a month contact CAIN or make use of the materials on CAIN. It's had something like 17 million page hits over the period. So it's very, very widely used. And interestingly, the use by people outside Northern Ireland continues to grow, so that about 75% of all usage of the site is now from outside Northern Ireland. So you can see that it's being used by people around the world. So CAIN is very well established, but you could come to CAIN as, say, let's move ourselves 10 years down into the future, as a student in 10 years' time in America doing some sort of a programme on Ireland and know very little about the conflict here, they can go in and they can find a whole host of information. Absolutely, read about the people who lost their lives, they can read about the memorials, they can read the policy documents, etc. But we really believe that Cain would be greatly enriched by having the human personal account added to it, because all those facts and figures can certainly have some impact, but I think it's when you listen to and hear an individual talking about the impact of the conflict on their lives, and that can be what we might consider relatively minor disruptions to lives, like simply living on a closed road and having to take a major diversion through each time you go to work, to people who've been much more severely impacted through loss or injury over the years. So we wanted to enrich Cain, and we also wanted to try to work with projects to preserve their stories. So I already mentioned that we were aware that most of the good work was being done at voluntary and community sector level. So why would a university get involved? For those of you who don't know, this is the main building at the McGee campus, just up the road. We believed that the university had certain strengths and attributes that would allow us to work very well in partnership with the voluntary and community sector to do this. Firstly, and perhaps most evidently, the university is a huge organisation. It has a secure data centre, so we would be able to work with the centre of the university to ensure that the materials that we held were securely held, would be updated to the latest technological platforms as changes came along, etc., etc. Plus, Incore has been working, we're now in our 21st year, on these issues for a long time, and a lot of research work is going on. And Cain has been going since 1997, so there is a respect, I think, amongst society that Cain is an excellent resource. It's neutral in the terms that anything can be neutral in this region, and that accounts could usefully sit alongside of Cain and be housed in the university. The university is committed to peace building in the region and was keen to support the work that we did. So I've told you a little bit about what we wanted to do. I'm sure many of you sitting there now are already thinking about, oh, there's certain problems in terms of trying to do this. Anyone have any suggestions as to some of the problems that we might have encountered in trying to bring these stories together into our archive?
I think one is how to sort of equally balance different perspectives from different communities. So it's obviously Catholic Protestant, you're not biased or whatever favour one towards the other, or how do you do that?
Yeah, that's one big question. I'll come back to that in a minute. Any other questions or concerns that you might have? Yeah.
The issue was the disturbance of the peace. What people faced. That was the faced. People faced the disturbance.
In terms of us working to deposit their stories?
Of everything, everyday's life.
Yes.
And people getting killed.
Yeah.
People facing jails. All those were issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the onset of the whole thing. Sorry, the lady at the back.
Yeah, I also think that it's actually, for some problems, just to have their story being online. And
yes. Yeah. That's a massive question. And one more? Oh, two more? You go first, the man with the glasses.
Just on a sort of technical point, I mean, I've just checked the Cain website, on my phone. The web page doesn't seem to be, well optimized for that kind of format. So I think the issue of how you optimize these archives for the broader range of
media.
Yeah.
That's a whole different seminar we could have on that one, but yes, that's really important. And so there's one other comment here at the front, was there? No?
Yeah, sorry, just contradictory stories.
Contradictory stories, yeah. Yeah, these are all, and that's just you thinking for half a second. I don't have time today to go into all of the things, but I'm going to mention just some of the biggest issues that we've faced so far. And the first one is around, we believe at Incore that the story that was told to whatever project or whatever organisation actually is still belonging to the individual who gave that story. So we spent ages working around how we would do this. We felt that nobody who had given their story to a particular project for, say, the purposes of producing an edited book should automatically have their story put into our archive with the permission of the project, but not the permission of the individual. So the baseline permission that we need is from the individual who gave their story, because it is a very different thing to speak to a researcher and understand that perhaps an excerpt of your story will be in a book or on a DVD or be adapted for a dramatic performance or whatever, to having the full interview available online, accessible to the world, and that's a huge issue. So if I've told my story to a particular organisation, we had to work with the organisation, get their permission in principle to deposit their collection, and then speak to the individuals who gave their story and get their permission. So it might be that a particular project had collected 20 stories, but only 10 people actually wanted to be deposited within accounts. So that's the baseline. The story, in our opinion, the story belongs to the individual, and the only full stories we will hold in our archive are where we've got full permission. And that's a problem because people move, people are not accessible, people have maybe forgotten they've given their story. There's a whole host of issues around that. So that's the ethics and the permission, and the lady at the back referred to the other thing. We believe, and we don't fully know the answer to this yet, but having your story online, publicly accessible, is different to having it in a book. And particularly perhaps some of the lower numbers of print books that were produced from some of these projects that aren't that widely available. Once your story goes onto the archive and is publicly available, anybody anywhere can potentially come across it, and that is an issue. One of the other gentlemen who asked a question there mentioned about contradictory stories, and another one about cross-sections of stories. We have worked primarily with current projects that are collecting stories, and we have endeavoured to work with them and try to ensure a cross-section. But we need to encourage lots more deposit to ensure a really good cross-section. Contradictory stories, we believe that a story belongs to the individual, and you and I, having been sat beside each other at a particular event, will have a completely different account of what happened. We all know that. We are not in the process of editing stories or making them different. What we want to do is have your story there, obviously without any libelous materials within it, which we couldn't have. But our hope is that an archive like this will allow a number of different stories about, say, an event or about a city or about whatever it is to be there, so people can come in and they can read my story, they can read your story, they can read somebody else's story. So they will begin to see a little bit more of the complexity and the issues around the stories. And so that's our hope, that the archive will grow and develop and become more and more helpful in terms of understanding the complexity. Other issues, and again, you've picked up on this: security, technological platforms, etc., etc. One of our concerns has been that typically academic archives are very dense. They're formatted for people who are happy to sit and read small print and big long pages. They're not very user friendly. So we have had to think about that, and in fact we're using a platform or a software package called Omeka because it seems to have a user friendly interface, and you can see it when we preview it in just a few minutes. In terms of security, we talked about the secure data centre at the university, but also there's even the practicalities. So if a project in Fermanagh is collecting stories and has them on their computers in their office, how do we get them to the University of Ulster? What we've had to do is send colleagues out with encrypted hard disks, copy the material on, bring it back and get it onto our servers securely. So there's all those sorts of things as well. You don't want material going missing or being lost while it's in our care. Obviously, older stories are going to be more difficult. Some of the projects that collected those may no longer be in existence. They may not have had funding to continue their work. There may be an individual who's particularly associated with the collection, but they may not have the time, the resource, or indeed the interest to try to engage their contributors to take part. So older stories may be missing from the full archive, but nonetheless we can database them and provide some summary details in the database section. Okay, I have a very simple brain. And I like to see things very clearly. So I've developed 2 slides here that may or may not be helpful to you. The first thing is that all the accounts that we hold in the archive, the individual accounts, exist in our database and in the archive. But all of them are identified by the collection of which they were part and the organisation who collected the story. And that's extremely important, because if you're talking to an organisation that has been set up specifically to document, say, one community's story, you need to understand that this story was given to this organisation in the context of what their aims and objectives were. And another collection may be different. None of you mentioned the issue about certain stories sitting side by side, that it might people might not be happy to have their collection in an archive where there was another collection. But that was one of the things we were concerned about. I think we have somehow overcome that, in that each story is clearly identified as part of a collection and belonging to the organisation. So that's been an important development. So the 3 levels: the accounts, the collection, the organisation. But you will never get to a story in our accounts of the conflict resource without knowing what collection it belongs to and what organisation collected it. And then this is the real simple one. So we have at the back end an archive where the full accounts are deposited. In the middle, we have a repository where we database all the known storytelling work that we're familiar with in Northern Ireland. So if you can imagine, we have 1,000 catalogue entries here. We might only have 100 or 200 full stories in here, because we haven't been able to access the other stories, we haven't got permissions or whatever it might be. So here you'll be able to search. So say you're interested in stories about this city, you can do a search and you will find a listing that will tell you how many are actually deposited here, how many are available on Kane. Some books, for example, are available on Kane. How many are available in chapters on Kane? How many other online sites have stories? And some we will just have the bibliographic reference. Okay? And this will all be searchable from the front end from the website. Does that make sense? Okay, well, we'll preview it now, hopefully, to test my skills, as I'm not a Mac user. Okay. And I go to here. And here. Okay, so we have a health warning here. This is, if you like, the beta version of the resource. It's not publicly available yet. As Susan said, we've done 4 earlier roadshows, so some people have seen the resource outside of the team. After every single one of those meetings, we've come back and made some minor tweaks to the resource. So if there's something here that you feel just doesn't work well, that's what we want to hear about. If there's something else, we really want to know your views about the resource. So in terms of making it user-friendly, we decided we would have a very plain homepage, which has the banner at the top. And note, I think I introduced myself as being from the University of Ulster. Actually, that was a lie. I'm now from Ulster University. We've just rebranded this week. So, so there'll be a new logo going on there in the next day or two. Can I make that do that? Oh, yes. So the homepage has a little bit of text here about the project. It has a... doesn't like me, this. It has a quick search facility. It has a featured video. In this case, people have asked us, why are you putting up a certain video? This is randomly generated from the database. This is not me telling you this is the story you should read or listen to. This is randomly generated. Every time you go in, you'll get a different story there. Okay, in this case, it happens to be from a Healing Through Remembering collection. And at the bottom, we have a section which, for people who might come back to the archive a lot, tells you what's been recently added to the collection, so that you will know that new collections have gone on or new stories. And then we have our Twitter feed here. Oops. We have tried to simplify the facility as much as possible. We feel a lot of people coming in will want to browse. They're just going to want to get a sense of what's there. And as I've already explained, you can browse. The collection is organised in terms of individual accounts, collections, and organisations. So if we go into Browse Items, at the minute you can see that we have about 300 odd items databased. If we're interested particularly in the video collection, and let me just do a search by availability, you'll see that only 8 have come up here now. We're busy populating the archive. And we can go straight to these stories. In this case, it's deposited, and we can hopefully hear this.
My name is Alex Bunting. I was a taxi driver. I was blown up in 1991, and this is some of the shrapnel that was taken out of my body. All of a sudden I seen this flash coming out of the dash, and how I can explain it was just like the likes of a rainbow, and the babe was all colours, and I don't know why, but instantly I put my hand down, hit the door, and seconds later the bomb, must have been the detonator going off, but then the bomb went off. My left leg was...
Oh, sorry. Right at the... So I'm not going to play the full story again. This is just an example of you being able to do research and get through to stories. And obviously, we would all like to sit and listen to not just this story, but a lot of the other stories. But you can maybe do that when the site goes live in due course. So that's an example of a video that we have in our collection. You can go in to the story and get quite a lot more detail about the person whose story is being told, about the organisation who created, in this case Healing Through Remembering, the publisher, the date, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot of information there about the actual story. You can choose to look at that or not. Some people will want to see it. For the people who are interested in technology, they may be interested in the video format, the video information that we have there, around the format, etc., original format, etc., etc. So there's information there. And then about the collection, as I've told you. So it tells you this particular collection was called Ordinary Objects, Extraordinary Times, and gives you information about it. And finally then we have information on the organisation. In this case, Healing Through Remembering. So there's a lot of information about every single piece. Some people will come into the archive and have absolutely no interest in any of that detailed information, but there may be researchers, journalists or community groups who are interested in all of that in due course. So that's the first way you can search, is through browsing an individual item. The second way is, I'm not going to show everything, I'm just going to show you now browsing an organisation. And in this case, I've said we will provide links to other online materials. So if we go down here, you can see that we have the BBC Radio Ulster Legacy Series, and it's got an icon over here saying it's an external website. So click on that and you go straight through to the web page from the BBC website with the audio clips. So in this case, BBC hasn't given us the permission to hold their materials in our archive, but we're able to link you straight through to their online collection. Okay, so that's the second way that a resource can be things. What do I do now, Owen? This? Okay. Okay. So that's that. We also thought that some people might come in with a specific thing that they want to search, either an event, a person's name, or something. So we have created at the minute what's called an advanced search, but I think it will probably be a just called search. And this is one of the areas that I should have mentioned earlier that's a big problem for us in terms of definitions, terms, language. Even the name of this project is contested. Why is it accounts of the conflict? Why isn't it accounts of the troubles? Why isn't it accounts of the war? Why isn't it whatever? If you're looking for stories about this city, or you're looking for stories about Derry, Derry City, Londonderry, whatever. So how do we build a search facility that allows you, if you're interested in Derry, to not only find the Derry stories, but also the Londonderry stories, which we as a project would really like you to be reading both sorts to try to understand the different perspectives and different experiences of communities. So this will definitely change. This is an evolution at the minute. We are working through a process trying to do this. But just to show an example, don't allow, I presume, Owen? My own fault, I forgot my machine. Omagh, and if I was interested, say, in men's stories about Omagh, and I'm going to narrow it down just to the bombing in Omagh. And again, bombing's obviously a word that is contested, and we need to think about that. Oops, sorry, can I get this to do what it's meant to do? No. Can't get down to submit. Why is that? Oh yeah, maybe. Oh yeah, there we are. So we've done a search on that, and we come up with 14 hits at the minute. And if we go down to here, we can see there's a story from a man called Stanley McComb who lost his wife in the Omagh bombing. And in this case, his story was given to a book, Omagh Voices of Loss. That book is available on Cain. So if you click here, it takes you to the story details, and you can go in and, actually go straight to the story. And in this case, it's text, and you can read Stanley's story as it appears in the book. So I've shown you a video example, a link to an audio example, and now a link to text. So you can see the sort of range of materials. There will also be some photographic materials. There will also be quilts, etc. Back. Which back? Oh, this one. Right, okay. The other thing is that I said to you we wanted to enrich Cain. So for most of the stories there will be other material. In this case, on the Cain website, there's a lot of information about the Omagh bombing. And by clicking here, it takes you straight through to the Cain website. So you can see, unfortunately, the names and details of all those who died, the details of the main events during the day, some of the press releases, some of the policy reports and investigations into it. So you can actually go in, find some stories talking about Omagh, read, listen or whatever to those, and then you can come to Cain and you can get some other facts and figures around the event. And we believe that that might be helpful because our memories are limited. One colleague was cataloguing an entry the other day and discovered that the person was talking about internment but had the date wrong, the years wrong. Now we're not going to go in and edit their story, but if you come back and go into Cain, you can get those particular dates, and that's just a sort of a recent example. So that's the site. The other thing, if I can get up to it, is that we will have a deposit facility, which will allow you to deposit a story in the future. At the minute, there's nothing on that page because even though we have the architecture built to be able to accept stories, we haven't agreed the process. Obviously, if somebody wanted to make up a story and deposit it, libeling every person in this room in some way, that wouldn't be acceptable. So we've got to agree the procedures around how we will accept materials for deposit where it's individuals. At the minute, as I say, we're working mostly with projects. One facility throughout the site is that from the Cain website there are huge photographic archives. So in behind every page there's a randomly selected photograph, and if you're interested in photographs you can just do a click there and see the photograph, and as I say, they're randomly generated. So that's that, and then finally we have an about button. At the minute that just links to our seminar series, our blog and some contact details, but when we go live in a month's time, all being well, there will also be all our policy documents, what constitutes a story, permission forms, details of our advisory groups, etc, etc, etc. So there'll be a lot of information there. So that's really a very quick preview of the resource, and I believe if I click here and escape, no, I go back to here, is that it? And okay, so that's the preview. What we'd really like to do now is just stop and have a discussion with you about what you think of it, what you think it might be useful for or not, or any other questions or queries you have about it. Okay? And Adrian will join me for that. You want to sit? Or stand? You just stand. Okay, gentleman at the back.
I had a question. You say that, first of all, I think this is a good idea, a great idea, in fact, so it shouldn't be seen as like a criticism. But if you're culling stories from existing groups like victims groups now, that's not necessarily a representative sample at all. I mean, victims groups collect stories for political purposes, even if that's not open or stated. And so it strikes me that in the case of OMA, for example, which you showed, you might get a number of stories from particular aspects of particular perspectives that might not be shared holistically with even within the survivor community themselves. So somebody who didn't know what we're talking about, or didn't know what they were studying, or was just starting out, would go there and maybe not get the whole kind of picture. And the other question I have is curatorial control. You're going to have so many stories eventually. How you present them and how you showcase them in itself is sort of an act of control over them. So any comment on that would be interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the aim is, as you kind of alluded to at the end of your comments, the aim is to include as many stories from as many perspectives as possible. So the examples that were shown here today were, I suppose you could say they were more representative of victims, but we hope to have participation and stories from across the board, from security forces personnel, for example, from ex-prisoners groups, from victims, as we saw, and also, as Gillian mentioned at the very start of the presentation, people who may have been affected in a less extreme way, as in having to take a diversion to work every day or crossing over and back the border every day. So, yeah, the aim is to give as wide a perspective as possible without interfering in that actively by trying to present, 30% stories of victims, 20% stories of ex-security, 20% of something else, if you know what I mean. To come back to the curatorial question, the structure of the archive in terms of the way it's presented in organisation, collection, and then individual stories, I think that structure lends itself to a sort of inefficient curatorial mechanism, if you know what I mean. So there's no decision about how to present more stories from a nationalist perspective or a unionist perspective or anything else. The stories are presented within the context of the original collection. So we're not making decisions about what's put forward more than anything else. I'm not sure if that answers your question totally, but you can come back to me if you
There's a question here.
Yes, it occurred to me there when you were answering that stories from all perspectives and say personal accounts, what if that involves some criminality? I mean, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, one of the things about this archive is that all the people who have contributed to it and the people who have given permissions for their stories to appear on it are fully aware that it is completely open to the public. So this will be available online to anyone, members of the public, journalists, police, whatever. So anyone who is depositing will be fully aware of that at the outset. Another issue may come up there in terms of somebody implicating someone else in crime that would bring up an issue, and that would be something that we would have to look through the story first of all to make sure there's nothing slanderous or libelous in that, and to make a decision on whether it should go into the archive or not, for that very reason that it's publicly available.
Ione, did you want to add something?
Just for the first question there.
You want to stand up so that people can...
It was just, you were saying if a student who didn't know about the conflict came and seen a story that was really biased or untrue, it's the links to Kane, I think, that contextualises that and make sure there's always a link where they can get factual parts of that day to go alongside a story that might actually be completely biased.
But our underlying aim is that an archive like this, which brings together different collections from a cross-section of people, a cross-section of times, etc., will allow people... I mean, we can't stop somebody going in and finding the story that they want to hear. that supports their point of view if they have one. We can't stop them doing that, but our hope is that a resource like this will encourage them to not just read one story, to actually read another story, and to perhaps begin to understand that, you know, this event impacted on different sections of society or different parts of Northern Ireland differently, etc. And the ordinary everyday stories, like one of the collections that's been gathered at Corrymeela is about courage and resilience. So it's about positive stories as well. It's not just about stories about loss and injury and so on. It can be some of the funny things even that maybe happened during the conflict could be included in the resource. Okay, sorry, was there some more?
I used to work at the Public Record Office years ago, and like, you have open files and closed files. Does anybody that submits material to you, does it have to be available for immediate use, or will they be allowed to embargo it for a certain number of years?
Yeah, there is an option to embargo, and that is there mainly because a lot of these organisations and collections have published the materials either on websites, books, DVDs, etc. So the embargo option is there mainly to protect copyright issues. For example, if the book is still on sale in Easton's or whatever, the organisation may not want to jeopardise further sales of that book or DVD. They may not want to drive traffic away from their own website towards us, for example. So in those situations, they can deposit with us and put a date on the collection so that it would be released when their book goes out of print, or if their website, if they suddenly lose funding to host their own website, for example. So that we do have that option there. In terms of protecting material that may be sensitive or could be used for prosecutions or other issues, I don't think we would offer the embargo option in that case.
I mean, we can't, as we've all seen and witnessed from the Boston scenario, if there is a legal demand to show information. So everybody who's deposited with us knows from the information they've been given that the material will be publicly available, and even if there's an embargo on it, should there be a request from the police or the guards or any other international law enforcement agencies, we would have to release that material. So that may mean the archive contains safer stories, but that's another issue. There's a lady here at the front and then a gentleman just in the row behind her.
Well, I was just going to maybe ask the same thing.
Ah, right.
You know, the embargo thing.
Okay.
You know, if I wanted to tell my story, then I would want to name the person responsible.
Okay.
So, and I wouldn't want it redacted in any way.
Right.
You know, it would be my story, but with the person who murdered my brother with his name in it.
So it might not be a suitable story to hold in an archive like this at this point.
No, obviously.
Yeah. Okay, and the gentleman at the back.
I was just wondering, do you include stories where belong, anonymous stories or partly anonymous stories?
Yes, we do actually. Yeah. Again, a lot of the collections that we're working with and the projects we're working with, some of them may have used anonymous stories or anonymised their participants in order to protect their identities, or in some cases it was a style decision where there would be a book produced with just first names, for example, or pseudonyms used instead of the full names. So when this goes live and you get a chance to look through it yourself, you'll see that there are quite a few stories with anonymous or a first name in double quotation marks, and in those cases you would know then that it's a pseudonym. But in a lot of cases people did use their full names too, so it kind of goes across that spectrum.
Okay. Is that lady with glasses at the back? No? No. Okay, lady, and then the gentleman in front of you.
Just wondering about the validity of stories. How can you ensure somebody's actually telling the truth?
Yeah, this is something that it's a major issue in all kind of oral history collections, which is essentially what this is. That you have to put a health warning on it, essentially, and say that human memory is subjective, and that all these stories won't always be the objective truth or close to the objective truth. In some cases, dates will be wrong. Entire events might be in wrong places. People could be named in different situations that they weren't actually in. So it's our hope that we'll have such a vast array of stories that you'll be able to sort of get closer to what actually happened through listening to lots of different experiences of the one event, And then we have the links back to Kane then for anybody that wants to sort of verify information that they think, hold on a minute, Bloody Sunday wasn't in 1975. I better go double check that. And we have that link down below. So say if someone mentions Bloody Sunday, for example, there may be a link to the Savile report or a news report from the Derry Journal or the Irish Times or the Guardian or whatever, a contemporary report. So hopefully we'll be able to provide that kind of more factual information that can complement the human stories.
There's a gentleman at the front and then another gentleman at the back.
Isn't there a danger that in some future scenario information from this archive might be used selectively? In 100 years from the First World War, we're still looking at that selectively. And maybe many years from now, this material could be used selectively in the way that the Bible and the Quran are used selectively.
Yeah, there is a great danger of that, and that's something that historians are beginning to become very concerned about now with the onset of more digital technologies, the digitization of more and more records, more and more resources. So if you were writing a history of the revolutionary period in Ireland, for example, almost 100 years ago, the sources that are available are quite sparse. So you have government records, newspapers. We now have some oral history records of that period as well. But when people look back at this period in 100 years' time, they're going to have a raft of information. Everything will be digitized. We'll have the daily thoughts of everyone available through social media, for example. So it's envisaged that in 100 years' time, historians are going to have to be even more selective of what they use to write the histories of these events, because there'll be so much information that it'll be impossible for historians to include everything. So it's a huge philosophical question, and it's something I think that we're going to have to look at in the coming years, because it's going to become a huge issue for people looking back on this period.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can see some dangers. I was involved with Occupy, just two things. It was a big debate whether we should allow fascists to openly express their viewpoints or whatever. I think there can be dangers, that, and there was expressions like to let them just mix amongst us or whatever. And in the end, we booted them out. But I think there's dangers of having an open, show anything we show. And secondly, as well, I would be concerned about, say, some of the emotional impact, psychological impact, and the hurt and pain that people feel. I know I did some workshops with Theatre Witness and Taya, and actually what they do, this is powerful stuff. I'm not saying I'm not seeing it, but I see there's real powerful things on there. I think that there should be some kind of delicacy around that, about, not just putting things on straight away. There was a lady here said, she expressed that view. She'd be offended to see something like a brother's murderer. I can actually sympathise with that. So I'm wondering what the story is there. I just do see danger marks,
Yeah, that's a huge concern at a whole range of different levels. So increasingly, some of our inquiries that come through to the Kane website are actually from young people who have maybe lived in a house where there's a sense that Uncle John died or was murdered or whatever in the conflict, but it's not really spoken about. Other houses, there'll be lots of speaking about things, but some houses not. So this young person comes onto the site and reads an account of what happened to his or her Uncle John. How do we provide some sort of support to that young person who may be upset? And with an online resource, that's not an easy thing to do. So we will be developing, if you like, a help page that will at least point people to some of the organisations who may be able to provide some sort of support. It's not perfect, it's not good, but that's it. And one of the other things we need to think about is, somebody at another session when we were in Dundalk last week said this would be great to have some of this material for very young children, and we immediately thought, well, yes, but look at the issues around working with some of these stories with young children, never mind adult populations. So they are very emotive things, and yes, you can argue the other side, this is in the newspaper every single day or things like this, and we manage to navigate our way around it. But building a resource like that, we do have to be careful. And all we can assure you of is that we have built up relationships with the projects, and they're the ones who've been working on the ground to build the trust, to support the people whose stories have been told. And we're trying to learn from that best practice, but it's a hugely important point, and thanks for raising it.
Yeah, just to come in as well on your point about sort of extreme viewpoints maybe coming through on it. That's a good point, actually, and it's something we'll probably go back and talk about. It's something I hadn't really thought about in too much depth. You know, with the right to free speech, obviously becomes responsibilities, and you know, incitement to hatred or any of these issues. They're the same kind of issues that, you know, the BBC face or any broadcaster will face about who is included in political debates, no matter how much support they have, what kind of things they're going to be talking about. So whether there's another level of looking through the stories before they go on to find if that's kind of incitement or you know, offensive speech, whether we'd need to consider whether we would put that up or not. So thanks for that. That's a very good point. We'll consider.
What about uses? Should we ask about uses?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, this gentleman here.
Maybe we should obliterate all records of the past from creation to present day and start again.
As a historian, I think
I
as a historian, I think no, thanks.
I think our premise for this particular collection is that I think it is vitally important that people in the future will be able to hear individual accounts. Already, my children are teenagers and they've grown up in this city. They have no idea what it was like when I first lived here, came here to live, and they have no idea what those of you who've lived here your whole lives lived through. Somehow we have to be able to ensure that people can have some sense of that, to have a respect and some sort of understanding, and that's what we're about. And I think facts and figures alone don't convey that we do need to have stories, and there are loads of issues around this, but you know, our fundamental concern is that there will be an opportunity for people into the future to hear and understand. And even some of us, there are loads of stories that we've not yet heard ourselves or understood, even those of us working in the area. You know, there are sections of community whose stories haven't been shared. Seamus.
I like it very much for the fact that it is a partnership between academia and the voluntary and community sector. I think that's an extremely healthy, happy thing. And of course it's linked into Kane as well, which gives it added credibility. I suppose it needs to be said as well, it almost needs to be claimed that it's a digital archive of some personal accounts.
Yeah.
Beyond the stories that have been spoken or that might be spoken, there are those that are in a category called unspeakable. And I would be thinking not least of people who suffered at the hands of people within their own community. Those kinds of things. I suppose the broad, and this is just a statement, I have a slight concern about archiving stories as if that's enough. You know, there will never ever be an alternative to dealing with the past. And a political establishment would love to think that just by archiving it, that's it, done and dusted. We need to keep saying no.
Yeah, that's actually a very good moment to move on to the next thing we wanted to speak to you about, which is how we use these stories. I mean, the archive is all well and good. It's great that it's there. It's great that it's been built, and that's what we've been concentrating on for the last couple of years, is getting it to this stage. But what we want to do now is move on and find out how we can use these stories, how we can assess what we have in the archive and maybe what's missing, or are there any silent voices, or so we'd be really eager to hear maybe any of your opinions on that, about how it might be used in the future.
I'll just make a comment there, because I've actually spoken to some victims and they feel that it is enough for them to tell the story. So, I mean, to say that there's no alternative to that for them, that's enough. Some of the ones I've spoken to.
Yeah, a colleague of ours has done some research into the various storytelling projects, and that personal therapeutic element of actually telling your story has come through very strongly. But again, your point about, you know, sort of the wider context of it. Yeah. So there's a lot of issues that get thrown up here, and I suppose from our perspective, that's the research that maybe we want to move into, is to look at those kind of issues. But we think it's maybe useful beyond sort of, you know, academic research as well.
I'd just like to respond to that point again, because having spoken to the victims, for society to choose to deal with it, you can actually re-traumatise.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a real balance to be struck there.
Yeah, I think it's something we need to be very careful about. Sorry, there was someone just before you, and then we'll come back.
It occurred to me that in terms of how the information and the content is used, is there a common approach is there a common approach to copyright that covers all of the content, or does each, the individual piece of information have the same level of copyright?
Are you referring to each level of information, from video to text to? Yeah. As far as I'm aware, I could be corrected on this, but I think we're using a Creative Commons license for the website, so that it's you can reproduce it without any royalties to be paid. You can do that legally. I stand corrected. Another of our colleagues has been very involved in that area of it, but as far as I can remember, yeah, we're using that sort of Creative Commons license.
I don't know if this is the same question, but obviously when material goes publicly available via the website, it's difficult to control how it's used, and obviously anybody can provide a link to the materials, and anybody with the technical know-how and desire can probably copy some of the materials, but we have, as far as you can control these things, set it up so that it can be linked to but not lifted and taken away for use by others. And we only have permission to show it on our website, so if you decided you wanted to do some project and use some of these materials, you would have to go back to the individual and the organisations and get new permission to use it for that particular purpose. Okay?
Yeah, that clarifies what I said.
Can anyone have a veto which was on anything, or anybody could put whatever they like on it?
At the moment, what's on there and what is going to be on there by the time it launches next month, we've been working very closely with the Story Collecting projects. So what we have there at the moment is it's a sort of a collection of collections, if you know what I mean. So everything that's there has already gone through a process with the organisations that originally collected the stories, and they have then been deposited with us. With the self-deposit function that will come on board in the coming months, that issue will come up a little bit more, and we haven't nailed down exactly what the process is going to be yet. Are we going to accept more collections? Are we going to accept individual stories that will be, just that'll come from nowhere? And those veto issues then may come up about what we accept, what we possibly don't accept.
Were you going to suggest that we should have?
No, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're sure either. That's why. Oh no,
yeah,
but that.
Yeah. I think the main point in terms of accepting individual stories from unsolicited sources would be to carefully read them or watch them or listen to them before any decisions made about whether they go online or not. To just upload them and let them go into the ether would be, I think,
irresponsible.
Would be an irresponsible move. Yeah.
Yeah, can someone object to what's going on or what already has gone on?
In terms of what's there?
Yeah.
Yes, the person whose story it is, the person telling the story, if they're not 100% happy with how it's presented, or somebody else comes along.
There will be some sort of a facility where you can come back to us via email, presumably, to say you think that something should be is not suitable or shouldn't be there, or you would object to it. These are some of the things we've got to nail down. And we wanted to do a 3-year project. We got funding for 2 years and we didn't get started until 18 months ago. So there's a lot of these policies and procedures that we have been discussing but haven't reached the final say-so on, and that's been really helpful actually to come out to these roadshows and have your reminder that these are some of the important things that we've really got to try to get nailed down. We have worked with a group of local advisors and international advisors to try to get some best practice from the expertise here, but also from other international organisations. But it is complex. Oral history is a growing field, and the digitising of these oral histories is relatively new, and still there are issues. Okay, I think we've kind of run out of time. We're happy to stay around and speak to anybody who has time to do that, but we can maybe wrap up at this stage if that's okay. We have our international conferences on the 17th and 18th of November in the Holiday Inn in Belfast. It's free to attend. It's going to focus on 3 key areas: the ethical considerations in archiving and disseminating personal accounts, the practical development and implementation of the archives, and the dissemination and outreach of oral histories for peace building and social change. We'd be delighted to have you join us if you have time or an interest, and all fingers crossed and everything else. The resource will be live from that day, but it is an evolving archive. It won't be full ever. So, you know, we will be modifying, adding to and building hopefully over time. So thank you very much indeed. It's been great to have you along. Thank you.